Welcome back to everyone's least favorite game that everyone hates playing, the Blame Game. Sponsored by USA Network's Mr. Robot. I'm your host, Chet Chapman, and please don't blame the messenger. Where's the fake audience laugh? Crickets? Really? Tough crowd. Now let's meet our two contestants for today's Blame Game. Contestant number 1 is the POTUS, King of Debt, Tariff Man, Mr. Bigley, and Tweeter-in-Chief here in the U.S. and lives at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. He's seeking re-election for 2020 on a greatest economy ever platform. His administration is currently running official federal government budget deficits of $1 trillion and handing out lots of goodies to the military-industrial complex and large corporations for share buybacks with his tax cuts. He's currently blaming the Federal Reserve almost every day on Twitter for too strong of a US dollar and not devaluing the dollar fast enough, even though the dollar has already been devalued so much. He wants more QE, more rate cuts, and a weaker currency for many reasons. He even tweeted today about the Fed being cowardly for not copying Japan and the European Union with negative interest rate policy. Will he win today's blame-shifting game? Contestant number 2 is the official head of the large U.S. banking cartel, the Federal Reserve, devaluing the U.S. dollar rapidly and by over 97%. Since the Fed was created in 1913, the Fed is responsible for all artificial booms and busts in the U.S. economy and also many of them in the global economy. The Fed hands out bailout dollars like Halloween candy, is the great enabler for reckless behavior from large banks, large corporations, and big government, tells independent auditors to go pound sand, and has a long-term track record of policy and prediction errors so bad that they couldn't exist in the real world without protection from big government and a license to create unlimited fiat currency and credit out of thin air to paper over their countless mistakes. The Fed is currently blaming Trump's administration for running large government budget deficits and claims that their monetary policy before, during, and after the 2008 financial crisis up to now saved us and is not the culprit of wealth inequality or inflation in the U.S. The Fed claims that the blame lies with fiscal policy instead of monetary policy, but who keeps giving the alcoholic more drinks and chastises them for not staying sober? Will they win today's blame-shifting game? Or will the economic and political elites just change the rules to avoid any blame at all, like they always do throughout history, and continue to screw over U.S. savers, retirees, pension funds, U.S. consumers, and future generations of Americans like they always do? Welcome to dystopia, and unfortunately this blame game will keep going on until the next major crisis, and then long after, everything collapses or there's a new system. And even if you don't want to play, you're forced to.
So, I did that little parody commercial there of the Blame Game show, Trump versus the Federal Reserve, and it's going to continue playing that way. There are lots of high-ranking members of the Federal Reserve, not just Jay Powell, lots of Fed governors and other higher-ups in the Fed, whether it's St. Louis Federal Reserve President James Bullard, who is blaming fiscal policy for the mess. But the Fed is monetizing budget deficits. And President Trump today tweeted, and I'll read his tweet from 8 hours ago, over in Europe and Japan, they have negative rates in all capitals. They get paid to borrow money. Don't we have to follow our competitors? Yes, we do. The Fed doesn't have a clue. Well, I agree with President Trump, the Fed doesn't have a clue, but he's saying we have unlimited potential only held back by the Federal Reserve, but we are winning anyway. The greatest economy ever, and Trump wants rate cuts, Trump wants QE, and Trump wants negative interest rate policy. He wants the Federal Reserve to copy Japan and the European Union. My God, I can't believe I'm even discussing this stuff. And some people are saying that Trump is going to be the most open president to MMT. It would not surprise me. It would not surprise me anymore. And for the record, Trump has said he is the king of debt. A lot of people forget that. I do not love Trump and I do not hate Trump. If I like something that he does, I give him praise for it. If I do not like something he does, I criticize him. I try to be at least somewhat fair compared to everyone else. But the craziness is going to continue and it is going to escalate. the not financial advice, just my opinion drinking game. That's because of the Virginia State securities regulators who someone lied to them and they showed up at my door and would not leave. That was almost a little over a year ago. So there's a reason I do the disclaimer. Sorry, Paul, you don't like my little parodies. I'm doing the best I can. I'm trying to add some humor into how crazy everything is. Trying to interject a little bit of humor. I called it being ruthless in comedy, so ruthless and funny, so ruthlessly funny on Twitter. No, Trump wants to go big. This all goes back to his history as a commercial real estate developer. He always borrowed as much as he could. So, the Fed is blaming Trump. The Fed is blaming the Trump administration for the size of the budget deficits, and we had an absolutely record budget deficit. This story came out on Friday. Peter Schiff tweeted about it. He said that the amount of public debt was actually $1.4 trillion. Jeff Gundlach said very similar for 2018, I think, as well. Jeff Gundlach, it was 2018 or 2019. Gundlach has been saying it was $1.4 trillion in size for a while now, over 6 months. And Peter Schiff tweeted out on Friday that the record federal deficit official increase of 26% to $984 billion for fiscal year 2019, the highest in 7 years, was not the real number. Peter Schiff said that the real number was $1.4 trillion. So on Friday, the U.S. Treasury said that the federal deficit for fiscal 2019 was that was a Freudian slip. $984 billion, a 26% increase from 2018, but still short of the $1 trillion mark. The U.S. government, that's intentional. They probably delayed some borrowing until next year to avoid the $1 trillion number. The U.S. government also collected nearly $71 billion in customs duties or tariffs, a 70% increase compared to the year ago period. Oh, so the tariffs are quote unquote working. The average person on Main Street is not benefiting from the tariffs. The U.S. government is collecting lots of tax revenues, apparently, from the tariffs. The gap between revenues and spending was the widest in 7 years. Defense, Medicare, and interest payments on the debt ballooned and created the largest budget shortfall. So if you want to read more, the individual tax revenues rose 2% to $1.7 trillion. If you want to read more of the article, I will attach a link to it. So, this blame game is going to continue. It's going to get worse. The Fed, what's funny is the Fed uses a lot of Fed speak. So they say fiscal policy is the problem. I've heard Fed chiefs in the past, whether it was Bernanke, sometimes it was Greenspan, but more so it was Bernanke and Janet Yellen, talk about fiscal policy was the problem. They're blaming it on Congress. They're blaming it on the White House. They're blaming it on D.C. Meanwhile, the Fed is still, like I said, the great enabler. The Fed is like the drug dealer that keeps giving drugs to someone either that has money and pays for the drugs or doesn't have the money and the Fed just feels sorry for them and gives them the drugs anyway. Or the Fed is like the bartender that is slinging alcohol to the alcoholic who looks like they're about to vomit. When will the Fed balance sheet hit 1 quadrillion? We're not officially at 10 trillion yet, so we got a ways. Okay, this is an interesting question from Americo Padroni. My last video, how the Federal Reserve and governments would change laws to benefit them, wouldn't that get one started on the path to libertarianism? You would think that if it was a rational person and that they would study history and understand that they're going to get screwed pretty much no matter what by no matter which party and by the large corporations and Wall Street, the Federal Reserve, both political parties, whoever's in the White House, the bureaucrats here in D.C., that they would think to not trust government or the political process anymore. But instead it's blame capitalism, blame Republicans, blame Trump. That's how most Americans are. I don't care about the rate cut. The Fed is trapped. They can raise once and they'll make things worse. So most likely they won't raise. Even though St. Louis Federal Reserve President James Bullard actually gave a really weird speech in London about 10 days ago, and he said as of now they're in a cutting phase, but next year they could be in a rate hike phase again. Just weird stuff. I think my educated guess, I would say the Fed will probably cut 1/4 point, 25 basis point, although I think the odds have changed. It was 90% in favor of the cut last week and the week before. It was up to 90% that there would be at least one cut, and I think the odds have changed. I think it's down to like 60. What I heard yesterday, someone was telling me. It's in the government's interest to lie about inflation. A lot of it goes to cost of living adjustments, or COLA, on Social Security payments, payments on pension funds, to government retirees. It is in the government's incentive to underreport inflation. Also, IBJI, if you underreport inflation, you make GDP look better. So there's multiple reasons why inflation is intentionally underreported. If they don't cut, the Dow plunges 1,000 points or more. I don't know. We'll see. The plunge protection team will have to come back in. I'm not sure if Trump and the Fed are on the same page. He talked to lawyers and was trying to get Jerome Powell removed earlier this year. And legally, there was some legal problems about doing that. I'm not sure they're on the same page. The Fed may end up doing some of the stuff Trump wants, but Trump wants 50 basis point rate cuts. He wants rate cuts faster. He wants more QE. He wants this done faster. Now, there is some people at the Fed who are in favor of what Trump does. There are some people at the Fed who are Bernie bros, or whatever Elizabeth Warren's followers are called now. I'm not sure what her followers are called, but Bernie bros who are in favor of MMT, who want massive amounts of money printing, who are essentially socialists, or democratic socialists, even though I consider democratic socialists socialists. I do not think that they're on the same page. Trump wants everything done immediately. The Fed does not. Oh my God, that's hilarious. Get Off My Lawn says Warren's followers should be called the tribe. I love it. However, if you tweeted that at her and some of her followers saw that, you'd be called racist. And I think it's just really ridiculous that Trump is going after the Fed, saying he wants a faster devalued dollar. Meanwhile, the dollar has already been devalued a lot. So Trump wants even more inflation that's not going to be reported in official government statistics. And he wants the dollar devalued even faster for a number of reasons. Hey Ken, I've been covering this, unlike other channels. Stagflation, shrinkflation, yes, I've been covering this. There's a number of different factors in the global supply chain. Someone was asking me yesterday, if the dollar is still strong relative to the other currencies, how can there still be inflation? Well, if the other currencies are being devalued fast, that puts inflation into the global supply chain. It causes higher prices. You add in tariffs on goods, that causes higher prices in the supply chain. All these things add up. So if other currencies are getting devalued faster than the dollar, and there's tariffs or higher wages or higher oil prices, although now there's not higher oil prices in the US at least, then, well, other than California. There's low oil prices in a lot of other states, but not California's not seeing any benefit from that. Yeah, my food bills have all gone up too. Grocery store, consumer staple items at Target, Walmart, the pharmacies that I go to, the grocery stores, and some of the restaurants I eat at. The average person doesn't detect inflation, doesn't understand what's happening, and is blaming it on capitalism and on Trump. A combination of the two. No, negative interest rates. Negative interest rates are more complex than that. Negative interest rates are bad Keynesian theory. They're trying to force people to not save. They're trying to force people to spend. They don't want people to save. They want people to spend. There's going to be shrinkflation everywhere. That's the problem. You might not know, Dimitri, you might not know at some of the restaurants if they're substituting the quality of ingredients. I've seen this myself. I've detected in dishes at restaurants, and I've heard from other people that in certain restaurants and also the grocery store that the quality of ingredients is being substituted too. So the portion size stays the same and the ingredients are substituted to save money. So that's another trick. Substitution of quality ingredients is another trick. Because everyone doesn't get money out of thin air, Sonny. The money only goes to large corporations, large U.S. banks, and the federal government. Those are the main beneficiaries. This is an interesting question. Thank you for the super chat, Dimitri. Negative interest rate mortgages, would they be fixed or adjustable? Well, I think negative interest rate mortgages would probably bankrupt a lot of the insurance industry. I think they'd be in big financial problems. So I think you'd get backlash. I'll give you an example. My best friend works at one of the best real estate agents in this area, and she has a mortgage business too. So not only does she make commissions selling houses and condos, but she also has a refinancing business. So those businesses would be hurt on that. I don't know. I think negative interest rates here in the US for regular businesses and mortgages, it would collapse a lot of the businesses. Nolan Watson of Sandstorm Gold has said similar things too. In his opinion, talking with regular business people in the US and Canada, he thinks if negative interest rates start to go throughout the economy in the US, and not just in the gold and silver mining industry, but throughout the economy, that a lot of businesses will start to collapse. No, global debt and global savings are not in equilibrium. Not at all. Everything's leveraged. The assets are all leveraged massively. I'll give you an example, Silver Stacker. So in China, for every dollar of GDP, there is $25 of financial assets. So that's 25 leverage. 25x plus leverage in China. No. Savings and debt are not equal. The equity, it's a balance sheet. So you have assets, liabilities, and equity. And if you have all these assets that are going up artificially raised in nominal prices with a lot of debt, the equity is in jeopardy of being totally wiped out if it has not already been wiped out. So everything's over leveraged. The US has a lot of leverage. I don't think it's quite... China has done an insane amount of things in the last 10 years. It's a lot. The US leverage is a lot, but I don't know if it's 25x. China's amount of credit in the system... China's GDP officially is what? 14 trillion? About 14 trillion, something like that's below the US. Their official GDP, total GDP. And China has over 50 trillion in credit. China does not have 50 trillion in savings. There's nowhere near that. So China's big time leveraged. How would annuities do in negative interest rate or zero interest rate environment? I don't like, personally, in my humble opinion, Not financial advice. So if you're playing the drinking game, you can take a drink now. I did have my Series 7 and Series 66 many years ago. I don't like annuities, period. And the reason I don't like annuities is because with a lot of annuities, as soon as you say, for example, if you give someone your broker for an annuity like $500,000, the broker who sells you the annuity gets a 10% check, gets $50,000 check. Yeah, I don't trust annuities. Everyone needs income. Someone asked me what other investments do I like, in my opinion. And people who need income, either you have to be entrepreneurial and you have to do side hustles or grow a small business. You're not going to find a lot of good, reliable income on the stock market or bond markets. The valuations on stocks are insane. And as these companies put too much debt onto their balance sheets, there's a lot of problems that come with adding the debt, that dividends could get cut at some point. Things are really distorted now. People are buying bonds for capital gains and stocks for safe dividend yields. And it used to be the reverse. People used to buy stocks for capital gains and bonds for safer yield. So it's gotten totally distorted. So the bottom line is that this blame game is going to continue, and there is a large bet that the stock market could crash by April. I'm not so sure about that, but we'll see. I don't think that's that likely. There's some people saying the stock market will crash. I think Michael Pinto said it could crash next month. I don't think that's likely either. Not when the Fed's just starting, not QE program of $60 billion a month. And the balance sheet's growing. The Fed's official balance sheet is growing much larger than they're claiming, than they were promising us. The article from April, it's just, there's bets on this. Someone bought a lot of options bets. Okay, so I'll read the article really quick. Someone just made a huge bet the market crashes by April, with VIX collapsing to 12 on Friday. This article was from Saturday, October 26th. Stocks push towards new record highs despite record high policy uncertainty. One trader took advantage of the cheap protection costs to place a huge bet on the market descending into the kind of chaos not seen since the 2008 financial crisis, as Bloomberg reports. Trading in call options on the VIX outweighed puts by more than 9-1 earlier this week, as the index is at its lowest level since July. The standout trade was one block of 50,000 April $65 calls that were bought for 10 cents for a total cost of $500,000. This trade comes at a time when the extreme deep out-of-the-money options are notably rich relative to the more normal at-the-money options. So it seems someone's betting on a lot more volatility. Meanwhile, Vanity Fair ran an article recently alleging that someone was front-running with S&P E-mini 500 futures contracts all of Trump's positive China trade announcements. No, I think balance sheet expansion. I think continued rate cuts and balance sheet expansion will worry people more. Once the repo madness facility is converted to a permanent repo facility, the U.S. federal government is not cutting budget deficits, especially if Trump wins re-election. Trump just raised over $120 million. Oh, you want the article? I'll send it. Let me see if I can get that in the live chat section. Trump just raised over $120 million for his re-election campaign. That is a massive amount so far. I don't think he had anything near that for his campaign. So he's going to be, from that perspective at least, like obviously the mainstream media is against him, the Chinese government's against him. There's a lot of large, powerful entities against Trump. All the bureaucrats in D.C. that were booing Trump at the Nationals game, that paid well over $500. I've heard some of the tickets were well over $1,000 that were booing Trump and chanting "lock him up" are against him. But Trump just raised a lot of money for his re-election campaign. Yeah, the article will be, if you didn't see it in the live chat, it will be in the information and description section. I really, if the Fed's going to keep increasing not QE and it's going to go to this permanent repo facility, they're going to be able, my educated guess as of now, they're going to be able to delay things past the 2020 election. The Fed seems fine with increasing the balance sheet a lot, and the average person isn't checking it. Not that that's the real number, but I report on what the official numbers are. There's a lot of people who love Trump. I get emails and I get comments under videos from them. He's very polarizing. There are a lot of people who love him still. Okay, well, that's it for this short little update. The blame game is going to continue. More higher-ups at the Fed, whether it's Jerome Powell, James Bullard, other Fed governors, are going to keep blaming, look for the keywords, blaming fiscal policy. That means the federal government running larger budget deficits, but the Fed is the great enabler. Both parties deserve enormous amounts of blame. I tend to blame the Fed more, because the Fed enables both political parties. The Fed bails out and creates moral hazard for all these banks, and large corporations. Okay, Omicron, you've copied and pasted this like a dozen times. The Fed only, the people at the U.S. government, federal government, only care about interest payments on the debt. They know the principal will never be paid off. They don't care. They do not care about the total amount of debt. No one cares. Occasionally, someone may run on a platform like that. Trump ran on the debt problem, and then as soon as he got in office, he's done a 180 on it. All that these politicians care about is interest payments on the debt, and that they're not too large, taking up too much of a percentage of the annual government budget. So our annual tax revenues that are coming in, is that amount, the annual tax revenues, being taken up too much by interest payments on the national debt. That is all that politicians in both political parties care about. I've had conversations off the record with a lot of bank lobbyists here in DC off the record. I've had conversations with people in high government agencies, bureaucrats, some politicians, both parties. That's really all they care about. Everyone wants to spend. Republicans are borrow and spend. Democrats are tax and borrow and spend. No one wants to fix things. That would mean the size of the federal government would have to contract a lot, and no one wants to do that. Not even Trump. Trump just gave the military an enormous amount more money since he's been in office. So please hit the like button, smash the like button. Thank you very much to my almost 200 Patreon account contributors now. It's growing very rapidly, up over 5-fold in 6 months. Been working very hard. Sometimes I mix in some of these parodies to take things that are sad or complicated and explain things in easier to understand or funnier terms, sometimes ruthlessly funny or edutainment terms. Not everyone's going to like everything I say or do. Doing the best I can. And thank you very much to my monthly Patreon and PayPal. The dozen or so on PayPal. And people chip in once in a while. It's much appreciated. You're allowing me to focus on making quality content and growing my small business. So even if YouTube decides to slow down all the growth on my channel and my views, I just logged in before I started the live stream show, and my views were down like 60%. Yeah, my views were down 60% from the last like 30 days. So they've collapsed too. It's just ridiculous. I'm working hard though to create unique content every single day, and you guys will be the beneficiaries. If you stay with me, you invest in me, you believe in me, you will get the best out of me. You will get videos like which gold companies benefit from the paper price manipulation. So even though all the crazy stuff the Fed may or may not do in the near future, if the gold price gets smashed, you will know which companies will benefit. I did not have to give that away for free. I could have put that behind a paywall. Probably should have put that behind a paywall. You won't. I doubt anyone else has thought anything about that in the gold and silver community. Although now that I put that out there publicly, I'm sure there'll be at least a dozen people who will be writing and saying that stuff and not giving me credit for it. Okay, that's it for right now. I'm going to go watch the World Series game and relax. Everyone have a nice rest of your week. And of course, there will be more good content coming.